Good evening, everyone. Ooh. Welcome to today's Community Budget Information Session. Before we begin, I'd like to introduce our interpreters for today. We've got Carmen Cota, Caprice Moreno, and Elsie Duarte. Elsie, Carmen, Caprice, would you like to introduce yourselves, please? In Spanish. Thank you.
Sí, muy buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Caprice Moreno y soy una de las asignadas intérpretes para esta tarde. Muchas gracias.
Las siguientes intérpretes que estamos aquí el día de hoy es Carmen Cota, Elsie Duarte, sus servidores aquí, y para al momento de hablar, de hacer un comentario, nada más les pedimos que hagan un comentario, que hagan una pausa después de cada dos oraciones y así nosotros poder interpretar de la manera más completa posible. Muchas gracias.
All right, well, we're going to go ahead and jump in. So first and foremost, for those that are in attendance, I want to thank you for coming out, both employees and community members. On January 15th, the City of Phoenix posted a 60-day notice of intent for council to consider a possible TPT, or transaction privilege tax and use tax increase on March 18th with a value of up to 0.5%. The increase may be considered as an option as we try to balance the budget for fiscal year 25-26 and resolve any projected deficits that we may face. As many of you know, the City of Phoenix, unlike the federal government, we are required to adopt a balanced budget. We cannot deficit spend. And so as part of that, the council may consider increasing revenues or reducing the size of the budget by cutting programs and services to make sure that that budget is balanced. I want to also point out, due to actions from the state of Arizona to eliminate residential rental tax, effective January of 2025, and to reduce the individual income tax down to the current flat tax rate of 2.5%, the city will receive less ongoing revenues and resources to pay for city programs and services. Also, the city has experienced a significant inflation and rising costs in the past several years, along with the adding further pressure to providing those services to our residents. It's important to note that we maintain the existing level of programs and service levels for our residents that you're receiving today, but we also need to increase resources for the fire department. As you know, as we are a growing city, and I'll show you some of this information as we progress through this slide deck, that our fire department is under immense pressure to add additional staffing to make sure that our response times are at acceptable levels. And I think we've got the backdrop of what just happened and is continuing to transpire in California to emphasize that point. I also want to point out that over the last several years since the pandemic, we have used strategically our COVID relief dollars, first and foremost the Coronavirus Relief Fund, then the ARPA dollars to stand up and expand our footprint as it pertains to servicing our homeless population, our unsheltered population. We've got about $158 million of our ARPA dollars, which was a $396 million total. So about $158 million, or 40%, of our ARPA dollars are already earmarked and working towards homelessness. However, those funds are set to expire by December of 2026. And so we've been working over the last 2 years to actually work to transition those homeless programs off of ARPA dollars and get them set up to continue into the general fund. The last reallocation of our ARPA dollars that we did back in November of 24, we reallocated about $13 million to our homeless programs, and we continue to work on transitioning those programs into the general fund. For next fiscal year, we anticipate that program will cost about $9 million, and then on an ongoing basis, it's about $25 million a year to continue our homeless-related costs. So tonight, what I'm going to do is walk you through some information that I think you may find useful and helpful. And if you have questions, we have time at the end for those questions, and I would just ask that you fill out a speaker card if in fact you do have a question. So I believe we only have one resident, so I will take my time, and if you have questions, feel free to interrupt me at any point in time. So first, I want to walk you through the general fund budget. And so as you can see, actually, this is the citywide budget. And as you can see, we've got an overall operating budget of roughly $7.2 billion. This is all funds, not just the general fund. So this is the general fund, special revenue funds, and enterprise funds. To give you a little bit of background, the general fund is the portion of our budget that supports those general activities like public safety, parks, libraries, human services, and things of that nature. Our enterprise funds are those funds that receive no tax dollars to operate, so think in terms of the airport, wastewater, water, and solid waste. Our special revenue funds, those are funds that are restricted and earmarked for specific voter initiatives. What I would call your attention to there are we've got two dedicated public safety taxes that were passed by voters. We also have Transportation 2050 and Transportation 2000, as well as the Parks and Preserves Initiative Fund. So as you can see from this slide, you can see where the money comes in from the general fund, and the majority of our resources into the general fund, about 40%, come from local sales tax and excise tax. The next biggest chunk comes from state shared revenue. That is primarily made up of the state portion of the tax that they share with cities and towns, as well as vehicle license tax and income tax, as the city does not have its own income tax. Then we've got 12% that comes from property tax, which is the primary property tax. So if you're a resident in Phoenix, you pay both a primary property tax, which supports the general fund operations, and then you also pay a secondary property tax, which is how we service the debt on the GO bond program. And then we also have user fees. Those are fees that residents pay for using city services. Think of the biggest one in there would be ETS revenue or ambulance transport revenues. So as you can see on this slide, you can see that the lion's share, 61% of our budget, goes towards public safety. That would be police and fire primarily, as well as emergency management. The next big chunk is community enrichment. So again, think about human services, parks, arts and culture, and those types of departments, as well as library. General government would be 11%. That's more the administrative arm of government. So you think about budget and research, finance, the mayor's office, the council office, and the city manager's office. And then we've got about 9% that goes towards criminal justice, community development, environmental services, and transportation. So now what I want to get into is just talking about historical growth within the city of Phoenix. So as you can see on this slide, and I'm at an awkward angle, so excuse me for looking down instead of looking up at you guys. The city of Phoenix has experienced significant growth since 1980-81 compared to the current year 24-25 budget. So our population has more than doubled, gone from 789,000 to just under 1.7 million. Our square miles of the city of Phoenix has gone from 325 square miles to 519 square miles. Total street miles, 3,084, just under 3,100, up to 4,800, almost 4,900. And then number of parks that we've added since 1980, 137 to 203. And the number of libraries that we've added in that same time frame has increased from 7 to 17. Next, when you look at the number of calls for service that our police and fire and some of our other departments have faced. So police calls have gone from 452,000 to 616,000 in that span of time. Our calls for service on fire have increased from 71,000 to 254,000. And the number of vehicles that we have serving the entirety of our city has gone from 4,500 to just under 8,000. And then if you can look at just business activity, so our planning department, the number of building inspections and permits that both them and the fire department have to oversee has gone from 196,000 to 285,000. And then the number of city of employees has gone from 9,434 to just over 16,000 employees. However, the interesting thing there is you look at that next bullet point on this slide, the total number of employees per 1,000 population, we're actually smaller per resident than we were 30, 40 years ago, which I think is a very impressive feat for the council to continue delivering services with basically fewer per capita city employees. So the next slide I mentioned in my opening, I just want to reorient you to SB 1131 and SB 1828. Unfortunately, the state has taken several actions to limit local control and to diminish the city's tax base by passing these two measures, which eliminated residential rental tax effective January 1, 2025. So for this fiscal year, we have a half-of-year impact of that. And then they also reduced that income tax down to the flat tax rate of 2.5 that I also mentioned. The city, again, I want to emphasize, we do not collect an income tax on our behalf, but the state shares income tax with cities and towns based on population. So next, this slide it's very busy, but in a nutshell, this is the impact of those two measures to the City of Phoenix revenues. So between now, this fiscal year 24-25, and the end of fiscal year 27-28, the city will lose about $300 million. So again, imagine trying to balance the budget in the absence of $300 million. It's going to be extremely difficult to maintain those programs and services with that amount of revenue being taken away from the city. The next slide, this one is also busy. You know, BNR, we do like our dual axis slides, so this one can be a little bit busy for most, but I'll orient you and walk you through it. This is the impact of our revenues that the state shares with cities and towns based on population from income tax. So you can see in the current year, we project to receive about $436 million. And then when you look out over the horizon through fiscal year 27-28, that's going to drop down to $353 million. So for this fiscal year, actually, I'm sorry, 23-24, we received 436. This fiscal year, we're going to receive 351 million. So that's a 19% reduction in just 1 year. And then it's going to continue to go down before it starts to get slightly flat back in fiscal year 27-28. So I do want to mention, as I did in my intro, there are a couple of things that are also putting additional pressure. It's not just all state action. So again, inflation, just like many of us at home, we're paying more for bread, milk, eggs, cheese, the vital essentials. So too are we paying more for the services that we provide our residents. The employee costs have gone up, cost of electricity, cost of vehicles, cost of vehicle maintenance, all those things continue to go up while the footprint of what we're serving has continued to stay flat for this year. I also do want to mention that fire, their response times, every second counts when we're talking about an emergency. And so in a medical crisis, when that happens, every second, you will hear firefighters tell you that every second counts. Response times have increased from 6 minutes and 48 seconds in 2015 to the current number of 7 minutes and 23 seconds. So that's a pretty significant increase, especially when seconds matter. The national standard for emergency response is 5 minutes or less, and that is based on 90% of the time. So fire tries to respond to those calls 90% of the time within that 5-minute time frame. That's the goal. The other thing that I'd mention to you is, again, I talked to you a little bit about homelessness, and so we've stood up quite a few of our shelters and added quite a few beds. Uh-oh, we didn't pay the electricity bill. But again, Rachel and her team have done yeoman's work in working with our unsheltered population. We've added significant number of beds. Between last year and this year, we're close to 700 beds that would be added. And again, 40% of our ARPA dollars are pointed towards these operations and standing up these facilities. I also want to mention here that as a result of another piece of legislation that the state passed, Proposition 312, which is the public nuisance law, if we are not on our A game in addressing encampments and other types of things that folks see as a nuisance, then individual residents can file to the state to have their property tax restored and returned by virtue of being a public nuisance. So again, this isn't something that we have a choice on continuing or not continuing. I think we have to do this. And then next on this slide, you'll see our bond program. So just in 2023, our voters passed a $500 million bond program. At the time, the council passed that, as well as the residents passed it, and council adopted and approved it. We projected that the ongoing cost of our bond program were about $27 million a year. And when we presented last year's multi-year forecast, we were able to show council that absent the state taking the action that they did, we had more than enough money to continue those programs and services. But this is going to continue to put additional pressure on our operating budget. And then again, in the current year, even though it seems like the economy is very hot, it's also very slow. So we're also experiencing less revenue coming into the city today than we anticipated, and we're going to be reducing the current year revenue projections because of that. And then again, I don't know about you, but I've talked to lots of residents throughout the course of a day, and not many of them are asking for less service. Most of them are asking for more services. So again, I think we have to keep that in mind as well. So here's something I think that is also interesting for just public consumption. The general fund sales tax rate is currently 2.3%. The portion of that supports the actual general fund, or the sales tax rate for City of Phoenix is 2.3%. The portion of that supports general fund services, our public safety, our libraries, our parks, is 1.2%. that 1.2% has been the same since at least 1986. So we're talking 40 years, but remember back to all those metrics that I explained in terms of the increases, but our sales tax rate has stayed the same over those 40 years. So I think it's, again, I think the council has done a great job at balancing our budget and expanding the footprint of our services to our residents, but receiving the same allocation of sales tax rate. The next slide I want to show you is kind of a valley comparison looking at retail sales. Retail sales is our largest sales tax base within the TPT categories, and so this is an easy way for us to show you how Phoenix compares to those of other cities. And right now, retail sales for the city of Phoenix is lower than 6 of our surrounding cities, and if the council were to increase the rate all the way up to 0.5, we would still be less than Surprise, and we would be tied with Surprise, but less than Glendale and Buckeye. So I think that's also important to kind of point out. Now this part is just kind of so you can put this into your head in terms of things that we understand, because I threw a lot of numbers at you and threw a lot of slides at you. But if you made a $100 purchase, today that $100 purchase would cost you $2.30 in sales tax. If the council went up to 2.8%, the full 0.5, it would cost you an extra 50 cents. If you made a $1,000 purchase, your sales tax today is roughly $23. Under the new scenario, if they went all the way up to 0.5, which is an option, they may not, they may go lower, it would be $5 additional. And if you made a $10,000 purchase, you pay $230. Under the scenario where they went all the way up to 0.5, it would be an extra $50. Now again, putting that kind of in more day-to-day things that we see on a daily basis. So if you bought a simple small cup of black coffee, nothing fancy like Starbucks and the double lattes and all that good stuff, roughly $2.10. So today you're paying 5 cents on that. If we went up to 2.8%, you'd pay an additional penny, an additional 1 cent. You take your family out to the movies and you're a family of 4, 2 adults, 2 children, that's roughly $38. You pay 87 cents on sales tax. If the council does elect to go up to 0.5, you pay an additional 19 cents. So we collect $1.06 in sales tax versus the 87. Dinner for a family of 4 before tip, and I know many of you are very generous tippers, $80 for that meal. That's costing you today in sales tax $1.84. Under the 0.5 scenario, it would cost you an additional 40 cents, so $2.24. If we bought a brand new washer and dryer set to keep our clothes clean, $1,000.96. In today's terms, sales tax is roughly $25.21. Under the 0.5 scenario, you would increase that by $5.40 to $30.69. If you bought a used vehicle, roughly $12,995, you'd pay $298.89 in sales tax. Under the 0.5 scenario, you pay an additional just under $65. So the next steps in our process, again, we will be presenting to the mayor and council on February 25th our general fund status, which tells us whether or not we have a surplus or a deficit. And given all that we've talked about tonight, as well as things that we started talking to council about last year when we presented the forecast, we are not anticipating a surplus. We are anticipating that we will probably have a deficit. And so we will present that to council as well as a 3-year forecast to show council what our revenue streams against our expenses look like through fiscal year 27-28. That will be on February 25th. Then on March 3rd, we will post the 15-day notice, which is the secondary notice to the notice that we posted on January 15th for the council to take action on the sales tax. And then on March 18th, we'll present the trial budget. Now that trial budget could possibly include reductions in services if there is a combination of cuts and revenue increases. We did ask all of our departments to submit cuts for us to consider, and we're currently reviewing those now. So for every department, with the exception of police, fire, emergency management, housing, homelessness, and heat, we've asked them to all submit 5%, and those departments I just named have been asked to identify 3% of their budget. Now that total would be more than we need, but we like to have options so that we can review them and try to come up with things that would have the least impact to our residents. So we'll present that trial budget on March 18th. That same day, we're currently scheduled for council to take action on the proposed sales tax. So that actually concludes the presentation for this evening. If there are any questions or comments about this evening, we are more than happy to take them, and we do have some staff here that could possibly address any questions or concerns that you have. Any questions? Hearing none, well, I want to thank you again for coming out this evening. We do appreciate your participation and you demonstrating your civic duty, so thank you.